Sometimes the hardest part about losing someone you love isn't the funeral or the flowers. It's that quiet moment the next morning when you wake up and realize you have to keep living without them. The gravel crunches beneath the tires of an old pickup truck as it travels down a long dirt road, dust billowing behind it like a ghostly trail. The truck crests a small hill, revealing a panoramic view of the Shenandoah Valley, the Blue Ridge Mountains standing sentinel in the distance. My name is Michael Turner. 6 months ago, my wife Laura passed away, leaving me with our two children and an old farm her family had owned since the Great Depression, a weathered patch of land outside Winchester, Virginia, where history and desperation intersect. The truck approaches a dilapidated farmhouse, its white clapboard siding faded to a tired gray. A sagging front porch wraps around the structure, and several windows are cracked or boarded up. A crooked "for sale" sign stands in the overgrown front yard, planted there by my brother-in-law, who calls it a worthless piece of land. The banks refuse loans for renovation. The neighbors whispered when they saw us shopping at the thrift store. My daughter Ashley, 14, and trying hard to look like none of this bothers her. My son Jason, 11, and determined to find adventure in our new circumstances. What none of them knew was what lay hidden beneath the floorboards of this forgotten farm. A secret worth $143 million, and a discovery that could have saved millions of lives during the Dust Bowl and might still reverse global hunger today. The midday sun beats down on the weathered roof of the Turner family pickup as it pulls into what was once a circular driveway, now little more than a suggestion of a path with weeds pushing through deep cracks. Michael Turner cuts the engine and sits for a moment, his hands still gripping the steering wheel, the silence heavier than any sound. His face shows the weariness of a man who has been carrying too much for too long. The rearview mirror reflects his children in the back seat, Ashley with her dark hair pulled back, eyes carrying a maturity beyond her 14 years, and Jason with his face pressed against the window, his 11-year-old energy barely contained. It's bigger than I thought. Michael glances at his son in the mirror, a small smile forming. The farmhouse is indeed bigger than the photos suggested. 3 stories of what had once been a proud homestead, now weathered by decades of neglect. The wraparound porch sags and the middle green shutters hang at odd angles. Mom always said it was beautiful. Ashley's quiet words hang in the air, the present tense a reminder of how recent their loss still is. Michael's chest tightens as he nods, opening his truck door. Your mom was right. It's got good bones, just needs some care. They climb out into the June afternoon, the Virginia heat wrapping around them like a heavy blanket. The farm stretches out in all directions, maybe 40 acres total. What had once been cultivated fields is now a sea of volunteer wheat, wild grasses, and untamed vegetation. A red barn sits about 100 yards from the house, its roof missing shingles and its doors hanging open. Beyond it, the land rises slightly before disappearing into a line of oak trees that mark the property's boundary. Jason runs ahead to the porch steps, testing each one carefully before putting his full weight on it. The aged wood creaks but holds firm. Dad, come look at this. Michael walks over and sees what has caught Jason's attention. Someone had carved initials into one of the porch posts, GM plus JT, with a heart around them and the year 1935 underneath. That's your mom's grandparents, George and Janet Mason. Michael runs his finger over the carved letters, remembering Laura's stories about them. The front door is painted green, though most of the paint has peeled away. When Michael tries the handle, the door swings open with a long creak. The inside smells of dust and age and something else. Something botanical, like dried flowers or old herbs. The afternoon light filters through dirty windows, casting everything in a golden haze. The front room is larger than Michael had expected, with hardwood floors that need refinishing and walls covered in faded floral wallpaper. A stone fireplace dominates one wall, its mantel covered in dust. Furniture sits covered in white sheets. It's like a museum. Ashley's voice carries a hint of wonder. They move through the house slowly, each room revealing more of the life that Laura's family had built here. The kitchen still has the original cabinets painted yellow with glass doors that show dishes and glassware left exactly where they'd been placed decades ago. Jason discovers a pantry behind the kitchen, its shelves lined with mason jars full of preserves that had long since gone bad. Look at all this stuff. There must be 100 jars in here. Michael peers into the pantry. The shelves are packed with canned goods, preserves, and what looks like dried herbs and seeds in smaller jars. Labels written in careful script identify everything. Tomatoes, 1960. Green beans, 1975. Elderberry jelly, 1980. Your great-grandmother was quite the gardener. Mom used to tell me about Janet's legendary vegetable garden. Upstairs, they find 4 bedrooms, each one frozen in time. Ashley claims the room that had been Laura's when she was little, recognizing it from her mother's descriptions. The walls are still painted pale blue, and there's a window seat that looks out over what had once been the garden. Jason chooses the room next to Ashley's drawn by the fact that it has 2 windows and what appears to be a secret compartment built into the wall behind a loose board. The 3rd floor is mostly attic space filled with trunks and boxes and furniture that hadn't been used in decades. By dinner time, they've managed to clear out and clean 1 bedroom for Michael and set up air mattresses for the kids. The kitchen is functional once Michael figures out how to get the old gas stove to work, and they eat dinner off paper plates. So what do you think? I want to explore the barn tomorrow. And I saw what looked like a creek back behind those trees. Ashley is more cautious. It's going to take a lot of work to make this place livable. After dinner, they sit on the front porch and watch the sunset over the fields. The sky turns brilliant orange and pink, and Michael understands for the first time why Laura had always talked about the sunsets here with such reverence. It's so quiet, different kind of quiet than the city. Mom always said this place had a way of making you slow down and think. When he finally gets the kids settled for the night, Michael walks back downstairs and stands in the living room trying to imagine Laura as a little girl running through these rooms. She had always spoken about her grandfather with such love and admiration, describing him as a man who could make anything grow and who saw magic in the simplest things. According to Laura, her grandfather George had been ahead of his time when it came to sustainable farming and soil conservation. He had experimented with crop rotation and natural pest control long before those practices became mainstream. The other farmers in the area had thought he was eccentric, maybe even a little crazy. But Laura remembered his fields always producing more than anyone else's. He doesn't know yet about the leather satchel hidden beneath the floorboards or the secrets it contains. He doesn't know that George Mason's experiments had produced something far more valuable than anyone could have imagined. All he knows is that this feels like the right place to start over. 3 days into their new life at the farm, Michael is beginning to understand why Laura's parents had eventually given up on the place. Everything that can break has broken, and everything that can leak is leaking. The roof has at least 6 places where rain comes through. The plumbing makes sounds like angry ghosts. Michael has spent the morning trying to fix a window that won't stay open in what had been George's study, a small room off the living room lined floor to ceiling, with books about agriculture, botany, and soil science. Most of the books are old, but they have been carefully maintained and organized. Ashley had found Laura's childhood journal the day before tucked away in the window seat of her new bedroom. She had been reading passages aloud at breakfast. Listen to this. July 15, 1985. Grandpa showed me his special plants today. He says they're magic because they can grow even when it doesn't rain. I helped him water them in the secret garden behind the barn. He made me promise not to tell anyone because people wouldn't understand. Michael had smiled at that, thinking it was exactly the kind of thing a grandfather would tell an 8-year-old to make gardening seem more exciting. Now wrestling with the stubborn window in George's study, he is starting to think there might have been more truth to Laura's childhood stories than he'd realized. The window finally gives way with a screech of protest, and fresh air floods into the stuffy room. As Michael steps back, his foot catches on something, and he looks down to see a loose floorboard that has popped up slightly. He kneels down and works his fingers under the edge of the board, lifting it to reveal a small cavity underneath. His heart skips when he sees what is hidden there. A leather satchel, old and worn but still intact, lies nestled in the space between the floor joists. Michael lifts it out carefully, surprised by its weight. Stamped into the leather near the top is a name: Dr. George Mason, Agricultural Research, 1935. Michael's hands tremble slightly as he unbuckles the satchel and looks inside. The contents are carefully organized and protected in oiled cloth wrapping. There are hand-drawn maps of the property showing areas that Michael doesn't recognize from his explorations. Detailed botanical drawings fill a leather-bound notebook, each page covered with careful observations written in a precise hand. Small glass vials contain dried plant specimens, each one labeled with what appear to be hybrid designations. DR7XT, Turkestan drought-resistant strain, 23 soil regenerative hybrid A12. There are pressed flowers and leaves that Michael has never seen before, and photographs of plants growing in conditions that look impossible, thriving green crops in what appear to be drought-stricken fields. But it's the letters that make Michael's pulse quicken. Correspondence with agricultural colleges, seed companies, and government agricultural departments, all dated from the 1930s and early 1940s. The letters speak of revolutionary developments in drought-resistant crops of plants that could not only survive in poor soil but actually improve it, of agricultural innovations that could change farming forever. Dad Jason's voice comes from the doorway, making Michael jump. Before Michael can answer, Ashley appears beside her brother, both children staring at the satchel and its contents spread across George's desk. "I think this belonged to your great-grandfather. It was hidden under the floorboards." Ashley picks up one of the botanical drawings, studying it with intensity. "Dad, look at this. These aren't normal plant diagrams. See how he's marked the root systems in these notes about soil pH and nitrogen fixation? This is really advanced stuff." Jason is more interested in the maps. "Look, there are X's marked all over the property. And what's this area behind the barn that's shaded?" And Michael looks at the map Jason is holding and sees what appears to be a detailed survey of the farm with specific areas marked for different types of experiments. The shaded area behind the barn is labeled Primary Test Site, Restricted Access. "We should go look." Jason is already heading for the door. "Wait, let me look through this stuff first. There might be important information we need to understand." But even as he says it, Michael is feeling the same pull of curiosity that has grabbed his son. Here is evidence that George hadn't just been an eccentric farmer. He had been conducting serious scientific research, the kind of research that agricultural companies and universities had been interested in. Ashley is reading through one of the letters, her eyes growing wider with each line. "Dad, listen to this. It's from the University of California at Davis, dated 1941. Dear Dr. Mason, we are most interested in your reports of crop yields exceeding 300% of regional averages during drought conditions. We would very much like to arrange a visit to observe your methods firsthand." Michael takes the letter from her and reads it himself. It is signed by someone with the title Director of Agricultural Research and has the formal letterhead of the university. This isn't the correspondence of a hobby gardener. This is serious academic interest. He picks up another letter, this one from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. "Dr. Mason, your preliminary reports suggest developments that could be of significant national importance, particularly given current global food security concerns. We are prepared to offer substantial funding for expanded trials of your drought-resistant varieties." Why didn't anyone know about this? If great-grandpa George was doing such important work, why did everyone think he was just a strange old farmer? Michael continues reading through the correspondence, and slowly a picture begins to emerge. The letters start enthusiastic and encouraging, but the tone changes over time. Later letters become more cautious, then skeptical, then finally dismissive. A letter from 1943 speaks of irregularities in reported data and inability to replicate results. Another from 1944 mentions concerns about scientific methodology and suggests that George's claims were inconsistent with established agricultural science. The final letter in the collection, dated 1945, is brutal in its rejection. "After extensive review, we must conclude that Dr. Mason's alleged discoveries cannot be substantiated through proper scientific channels. We recommend ceasing all research collaboration and suggest that future claims be subjected to independent verification before publication." They didn't believe him. Michael says it more to himself than to the children. Or maybe Ashley says quietly they had reasons not to want to believe him. Before Michael can ask what she means, they hear the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Through the window, Michael sees his brother-in-law, Scott, climbing out of his new pickup truck. His face already set in the expression of disapproval that has become familiar over the past few months. "Hide this stuff. Don't mention it to Scott." Why not? Because Michael says, remembering Scott's constant pressure to sell the farm, some things are better kept in the family until we understand what we're dealing with. Scott's heavy footsteps on the front porch announce his arrival, followed by his usual entrance without knocking. "Michael, where are you? We need to talk." Michael quickly stuffs everything back into the satchel and shoves it under the desk. "In here, Scott." Scott appears in the doorway of the study, his presence immediately making the room feel smaller. He's a big man who has made his money in real estate and isn't shy about letting people know it. Kids, why don't you go outside and play? I need to talk to your father. Ashley and Jason exchange glances, but obey, though Michael can see they are reluctant to leave the mystery behind. This has got to stop, Michael. I've been patient, but you're being irresponsible. This place is falling down around your ears. You've got no job and you're burning through Laura's life insurance money on a pipe dream. It's only been 3 days. 3 days too many. I've got a buyer lined up, someone who'll pay fair market value for the land. You could take that money, move somewhere sensible, and give those kids a real future instead of this fantasy. Michael feels the familiar anger rising in his chest, but this time it's tempered by something else. The satchel under the desk seems to pulse with possibility, with secrets that might change everything Scott thinks he knows about this worthless farm. I'm not selling, Scott. Then you're a fool. Laura's dead, Michael. Chasing her childhood fantasies isn't going to bring her back. The words hit Michael like a physical blow, but they also strengthened his resolve. Laura had loved this place, had believed in her grandfather's work, even when no one else did. Maybe it's time someone started believing again. I said I'm not selling. Scott stares at him for a long moment, then shakes his head. Fine, but when this whole thing falls apart, don't come crying to me for help. After Scott leaves, Michael sits alone in George's study, his hand resting on the hidden satchel. Outside, he can hear Ashley and Jason talking in excited whispers, and he knows they are discussing the discovery. They will want to explore, to follow the maps, to search for George's mysterious test sites. And despite every practical reason to be cautious, Michael finds himself wanting the same thing. For the first time since Laura's death, he feels like he is on the verge of something important, something that could change not just their circumstances, but their understanding of what is possible. He pulls the satchel back out and spreads one of the maps on the desk. Tomorrow they will start looking for George's secret garden. The morning sun is just breaking through the oak trees when Michael and the kids set out to follow George's maps. Michael has spent half the night studying the hand-drawn diagrams, trying to match the landmarks George had sketched with the current state of the property. Ashley carries a canvas bag with some of the plant specimens from the satchel, while Jason has appointed himself the official map reader. Michael brings along a shovel, pruning shears, and a growing sense that they are about to discover something remarkable. According to this, we need to go past the barn and look for a group of 3 large rocks arranged in a triangle. They walk through the tall grass behind the barn, their legs quickly getting soaked from the dew. The area is even more overgrown than Michael has realized, with volunteer trees and thick brambles creating natural barriers. There, Ashley points ahead to where 3 moss-covered boulders emerge from the undergrowth, positioned exactly as George had drawn them on the map. Michael feels a chill of excitement. The rocks are placed too deliberately to be natural, and they match George's sketch perfectly. According to the map, they should find evidence of George's main research area somewhere nearby. Jason is already pushing through the brambles, following what might once have been a path. Dad, come look at this, Michael, and Ashley hurry after him, using the pruning shears to clear away the worst of the thorny growth. What they find makes Michael's breath catch in his throat. Hidden in a natural clearing about 30 feet across are the remains of what had obviously been a carefully planned growing area. Raised beds, now overgrown, but still visible, they're arranged in precise geometric patterns. An irrigation system made of buried clay pipes is still partially intact, and the remains of what looked like a greenhouse foundation can be seen at the far end of the clearing. But it's the plants themselves that make Michael realize they have found something extraordinary. Growing wild throughout the area are specimens unlike anything Michael has ever seen. There are tomato plants that have somehow survived 40 Virginia winters, their vines thick as tree branches and still producing fruit. Grain plants with seed heads larger than anything he's seen in agricultural magazines. Root vegetables that seem to thrive in soil that looks poor and rocky. This doesn't make sense. Ashley kneels next to one of the tomato plants. These shouldn't be able to survive here. Tomatoes are annuals. They die when it gets cold. Michael is thinking the same thing. He's done enough gardening to know that what they are looking at violates basic principles of plant biology. Yet here it is, growing wild and apparently thriving without any human care for decades. Jason has wandered over to what appears to be a grain crop of some kind. The plants are taller than he is, with seed heads so heavy they bend the stalks over. Dad, look how big these are, and there are so many of them. Michael examines the grain plants more closely and realizes he can't identify the variety. They look like wheat in some ways, but the seed heads are different, larger and denser than any wheat he's ever seen. The plants themselves seem more robust, with thicker stalks and deeper root systems. Ashley is taking pictures with her phone and carefully collecting samples. We need to document everything. If these plants are as unusual as they seem, we'll need evidence. As they spend the morning exploring George's hidden research site, a picture begins to emerge of work that is far more sophisticated than Michael had imagined. The raised beds are arranged to test different soil conditions. The irrigation system is designed to deliver precise amounts of water to different sections. Even the plant spacing follows patterns that suggest careful experimental design. Your great-grandfather was a scientist. This isn't the work of a hobby gardener. This is serious agricultural research. So why did everyone think he was crazy? Jason asked, biting into an apple that has come from a tree they found in the clearing. A tree that, according to normal botany, shouldn't be producing fruit after years of neglect. Michael has been wondering the same thing. Based on what they've found, George's work deserves serious attention from the agricultural community. Yet according to the letters in the satchel, he'd been dismissed and discredited. Sometimes people aren't ready for new ideas, especially ideas that challenge what they think they know. Ashley is studying one of George's botanical drawings, comparing it to the actual plants they've found. Dad, look at this. He wasn't just growing different varieties of plants, he was creating entirely new ones. These notes talk about crossbreeding techniques that were way ahead of their time. Michael looks at the notebook Ashley is holding and sees detailed records of hybridization experiments, soil improvement techniques, and yield comparisons that would have impressed modern agricultural researchers. George had been documenting his work with scientific precision, recording data that proved his extraordinary claims. But it's Jason who makes the discovery that would change everything. He has been exploring the far edge of the clearing when he calls out, "Hey, there's something buried over here." Michael and Ashley join him at a spot where the ground is slightly raised and covered with what looks like a metal plate hidden under decades of accumulated leaves and debris. Michael clears away the organic matter and finds a heavy iron cover with a handle like the lid of a root cellar. When he lifts it, they find themselves looking down into a storage area that George had built underground. And what they see inside makes Michael understand why agricultural companies and government agencies had been so interested in George's work. The underground chamber is lined with wooden shelves, and those shelves are packed with carefully labeled containers. Hundreds of glass jars filled with seeds, each one marked with detailed information about the variety, harvest date, and experimental conditions. Detailed notebooks wrapped in oiled cloth document the results of George's decades of research. But most importantly, there are maps and photographs showing test sites all over the property where George had planted his experimental crops. According to his records, many of those plantings had been designed to naturalize and spread, creating permanent populations of his improved varieties. He didn't just create new plants, he seeded the entire property with them. Ashley picks up one of the seed jars and reads the label aloud. Drought-resistant wheat hybrid year 15 trials. Estimated yield increase 400% over standard varieties in low water conditions. Jason is looking at photographs that show fields of grain stretching as far as the eye can see, all apparently thriving in conditions that would have killed normal crops. Dad, if this stuff really works, it would be worth a fortune, wouldn't it? Michael is beginning to think his 11-year-old son might be right. If George had actually succeeded in creating the kinds of improvements his records claim, they aren't just looking at valuable plants. They're looking at agricultural innovations that could change farming forever. As they walk back to the house that evening, their arms full of samples and documentation, Michael feels something he hasn't experienced since Laura's death, not just hope, but excitement about the future. Maybe Scott is wrong about this farm being worthless. Maybe Laura had been right to believe in her grandfather's work. Maybe they have just discovered the answer to all their problems. But even as that thought fills him with optimism, Michael can't shake the feeling that they are also walking into something much more complicated than they realize. George's work had been dismissed and discredited for a reason, And Michael is beginning to suspect that reason might have had more to do with money and power than with science. The question is, would the same forces that had silenced George try to silence them? That evening, as Michael is going through more of George's notebooks, he finds something that makes his blood run cold. Hidden in the back of one of the journals is a letter that George had apparently never sent, dated just a few months before his death in 1980. The letter is addressed to Laura's grandmother and is clearly meant as a warning. "My dearest Janet, I fear that my work has attracted the wrong kind of attention. Representatives from AmeriCrop Corporation visited again today, and their interest in acquiring my research has become more insistent. I have refused their offers, but I suspect they will not accept my refusal indefinitely. I have hidden the most important materials where they cannot be found, and I have made arrangements to ensure that our family will benefit from this work someday, even if I cannot live to see it. If anything happens to me, make sure Laura knows about the special plants. She has always understood their importance, even as a child. The future may depend on keeping this knowledge alive." Michael reads the letter 3 times, his hand shaking slightly. George hadn't just been discredited by the agricultural establishment. He had been threatened. And now, 40 years later, would the same corporation come after his family? Michael thinks about these implications as he stares out the window at the fields where George's experimental plants are still growing wild. He and his children might have inherited much more than just a farm. They might have inherited a scientific treasure that powerful people have been searching for since before Michael was born. The next morning, their quiet research is interrupted when Scott shows up again, this time with a man in an expensive suit who introduces himself as James Whitfield from AmeriCrop Corporation. Mr. Turner Whitfield says, shaking Michael's hand with the practiced grip of someone who makes his living convincing people to do things they aren't sure they want to do. "Your brother-in-law tells me you might be interested in discussing the sale of this property." I told him I wasn't interested. Michael shoots a look at Scott. "Well, that's what we're here to discuss. AmeriCrop is always looking for properties with development potential, and this location has some interesting possibilities." Michael notices that Whitfield's eyes are constantly moving, taking in details of the property with the assessing gaze of someone who knows land values. He also notices that Whitfield seems particularly interested in the area behind the barn where they have been doing their research. "What kind of development are you thinking about?" Michael asks, though he has no intention of selling. "Agricultural research facility. We're always looking for sites where we can test new farming techniques and crop varieties. A place like this, with its history and varied terrain, could be perfect for our needs." Michael feels a chill at Whitfield's words. Does AmeriCrop know about George's work? "Is that why they are interested in the property I'm not looking to sell?" Michael says firmly. Whitfield nods as if he has expected that response. "I understand. Moving to a new place, getting settled, it's a big adjustment. But I hope you'll keep us in mind if your situation changes. We're prepared to make a very generous offer." After Whitfield and Scott leave, Michael feels uneasy. The timing of AmeriCrop's interest seems too coincidental. How had they even known about the property? Scott might have contacted them, but something about Whitfield's manner suggests he already knows more about the farm than he is letting on. Ashley has been listening from the kitchen and comes out as soon as the visitors leave. "Dad, did you notice how interested he was in the back area? And when he said agricultural research facility, what if he knows about great-grandpa's work?" Michael has been thinking the same thing. It's possible. If George was in contact with agricultural companies and universities, there might be records of his research that survived even after he was discredited. That afternoon, Michael decides it's time to reach out for expert help. He calls the county extension office and explains that he has inherited a farm with some unusual plant varieties and wants to have them evaluated. The extension agent, a woman named Dr. Eleanor Wright, agrees to come out the following week to take a look. As Michael hangs up the phone, he notices a black sedan driving slowly past the farm. The car doesn't stop, but Michael can see the driver taking pictures. The sense of unease grows stronger. Who else knows about George's work, and what will they do to get their hands on it? Michael gathers Ashley and Jason in the living room and tells them about George's warning letter and the visit from AmeriCrop. He can see the concern in their eyes, but also the determination, especially in Ashley, who has her mother's stubborn streak. "So what do we do now, Dad?" Ashley asks, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. Michael thinks about all they've discovered about George's lifelong work, to create plants that could feed the world even in the harshest conditions, about the forces that had tried to suppress that work, and about Laura's belief in her grandfather's vision. We protect it, Michael says finally. We document everything, learn everything we can about these plants, and make sure they're used the way George would have wanted, to help people, not just to make money for some corporation. Jason nods, his young face serious. Like Mom would have wanted. Like Mom would have wanted, Michael agrees. The sun is setting over the fields, casting long shadows across the land that had once seemed worthless, but now represents both a scientific treasure and a family legacy. In the distance, the experimental plants George had created continue to grow, their very existence, a testament to one man's vision and perseverance. Michael knows that difficult days lie ahead, that powerful interests will try to take what George created, that his family's future depends on choices he is only beginning to understand. But for the first time since Laura's death, he feels a sense of purpose, a connection to something larger than himself. Whatever comes next, they will face it together, guided by the light of a dream that has survived decades of darkness, waiting for its moment to change the world. Dr. Eleanor Wright arrives at the Turner farm precisely at 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning. Her university pickup truck carries an impressive array of scientific equipment, spectrometers, soil analysis kits, and genetic sampling tools that represent the cutting edge of modern agricultural science. But it's the weathered leather briefcase clutched tightly in her hand that catches Michael's attention. The kind of case that carries important documents, or perhaps secrets. The morning sun casts long shadows across the field as Michael walks out to greet her. Dr. Wright doesn't waste time with pleasantries, and her eyes immediately search the property, lingering on the area behind the barn, where George's experimental garden remains hidden from casual view. I appreciate you coming out on such short notice, to Wright. Call me Eleanor, and I should be thanking you. Claims about perennial food crops that self-propagate for decades aren't something we hear every day. Most of my colleagues would dismiss such reports outright. That's what happened to my wife's grandfather. So you mentioned on the phone. Shall we take a look at these miraculous plants of yours? Michael leads Eleanor toward the barn, with Ashley and Jason following at a respectful distance. As they walk, Michael can't help but notice how Eleanor studies everything: the soil composition, the orientation of the land, the native vegetation. Nothing escapes her professional assessment. Jason carries a collection of seedling trays, eager to show off the progress of the plants he's been nurturing from George's seeds. Ashley brings her mother's journal and the detailed notes she's compiled over the past week. As they pass the barn, Eleanor pauses to examine the structure. This building dates back to the Depression era, doesn't it? 1934, according to the property records. George, Dr. Mason, renovated it himself after purchasing the farm. Eleanor nods, her eyes narrowing slightly. The Dust Bowl years. Interesting timing for a botanist to suddenly buy a farm and start experimental agriculture. The path behind the barn has been cleared by the Turner family's daily treks to the research site. When they reach the 3 moss-covered boulders that mark the entrance to George's hidden garden, Eleanor stops abruptly, her expression changing from professional curiosity to genuine surprise. These stones aren't natural to this area. They've been placed deliberately and precisely. The positioning creates a perfect equilateral triangle aligned to true north. Michael hadn't noticed this detail before. How can you tell? Eleanor pulls a compass from her pocket. 30 years in the field. You develop an eye for things that don't belong. Your great-grandfather was marking something important here, something he wanted the right person to find. As they enter the clearing, Eleanor's professional demeanor cracks completely. She moves from plant to plant with increasing excitement, her trained eye recognizing immediately what Michael and his children have only begun to understand. This is impossible. Absolutely impossible. She kneels beside one of the tomato plants, gently examining its structure. These tomato varieties show characteristics of perennial growth, something we've been trying to develop for decades. The cellular structure has been fundamentally altered to allow for winter dormancy without cellular collapse. Jason steps forward, proudly displaying his seedling trays. I planted these from the seeds we found in Great-Grandpa's underground storage. They're growing twice as fast as regular seeds. Eleanor examines the seedlings with the focused attention of a jeweler assessing diamonds. The root development is extraordinary, and the leaf structure, I've never seen chlorophyll density like this in domesticated crops. This shouldn't be possible with 1930s technology, or even today's technology for that matter. Ashley opens her notebook sharing the documentation she's organized. We found all his research journals. He was crossbreeding plant varieties from around the world, focusing on drought resistance and soil regeneration. Eleanor's eyes widen as she pages through Ashley's notes. This methodology, it's decades ahead of its time. Some of these techniques weren't discovered until the 1980s. Michael leads Eleanor to the underground storage chamber, watching carefully as she descends into George's seed vault. Her sharp intake of breath tells him everything he needs to know. What they've found isn't just unusual, it's revolutionary. The underground chamber is cool and dry, preserved by George's careful engineering. Eleanor moves methodically along the shelves, examining the labeled specimens, her hands trembling slightly as she realizes the magnitude of the discovery. Your great-grandfather wasn't just creating better plants, Mr. Turner. He was fundamentally reinventing agriculture. These seed varieties represent solutions to problems we're only now beginning to address with modern genetic engineering. Michael picks up one of the glass jars, its neat label documenting experimental results from 1942. Why would this work be buried and forgotten? If he was so far ahead of his time, why wasn't he recognized? Eleanor's expression darkens. That's what troubles me. From what I can see, Dr. Mason's work should have revolutionized global agriculture. Instead, it was deliberately suppressed. When they emerge from the underground chamber, the midday sun feels harsh after the cool darkness below. Eleanor stands for a moment, surveying the hidden garden with new understanding. I need to run comprehensive tests on these specimens. Genetic analysis, growth trials, soil interaction studies. With your permission, I'd like to take samples back to my laboratory. Michael hesitates, remembering George's warning letter and Americrop's suspicious interest. Before I agree to that, I need to understand what we're dealing with here. What's the value of these plants in today's world? Eleanor chooses her words carefully. From a purely commercial standpoint, billions. Drought-resistant crop varieties alone represent a multi-billion-dollar market. Add in the soil regeneration capabilities, cold tolerance, and perennial growth patterns. We're talking about agricultural innovations that could transform global food production. But more importantly, these plants could help feed people in regions devastated by climate change. They could restore degraded farmland, reduce water usage by orders of magnitude, eliminate the need for most chemical fertilizers. Dr. Mason wasn't just creating profitable crops. He was developing solutions to problems we're still struggling with today. Ashley steps forward, her mother's journal clutched to her chest. That's what Mom always said. That great-grandpa wanted to help people, not just make money. Eleanor nods, a sad smile crossing her face, which is probably why his work was suppressed. Permanent solutions aren't profitable. Single-season hybrid seeds that farmers must buy year after year. That's the business model that built companies like Americrop. The name sends a chill through Michael. You know Americrop. Eleanor's expression hardens. Every agricultural scientist knows Americrop. They control over 60% of the commercial seed market in North America. Their business model depends on farmers returning each season to buy proprietary seed varieties that can't be replanted. Plants like your great-grandfather's, self-sustaining perennial food crops, represent an existential threat to their entire industry. Jason, who has been examining one of the experimental wheat varieties, looks up with sudden understanding. So that's why they want our farm. They're trying to control great-grandpa's plants. Eleanor glances sharply at Michael. Americrop has approached you about this property. Michael nods, explaining Whitfield's visit and Scott's pressure to sell. Eleanor's response is immediate and urgent. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to any testing. Don't allow anyone from Americrop onto this property without legal representation present. She pulls out her phone, checking something before continuing. I need to make some calls. There are people who should know about this discovery, people who can help protect it. I'll take minimal samples today, just enough for preliminary verification. But we need to move carefully, very carefully. As they walk back toward the house, Eleanor's demeanor has changed completely. The excited scientist has been replaced by someone more cautious, more strategic. I'll need about a week to run essential tests. In the meantime, document everything. Photograph all the plants, all the notebooks, all the seed containers. Create multiple digital backups stored in different locations. And whatever you do, don't tell anyone else what you found. After Eleanor departs with her carefully labeled samples, Michael gathers his children in the kitchen. The warm afternoon light filtering through the windows can't dispel the sense of unease that has settled over the family. I think we need to be prepared for things to get complicated. Ashley, ever practical, begins making notes in her journal. We should organize all of Great-Grandpa's research chronologically and map every test site on the property. Jason's approach is more direct. We should plant more of the seeds, prove they really work as well as Great-Grandpa said. Michael considers both suggestions, recognizing the wisdom in his children's instincts. Documentation and demonstration, the foundations of scientific validation. George would have approved. They spend the afternoon creating a systematic inventory of George's research materials. Ashley develops a cataloging system for the notebooks, while Jason sets up additional seedling trays in their makeshift greenhouse. Michael focuses on the correspondence, trying to piece together the timeline of George's work and its subsequent suppression. As evening approaches, Michael steps onto the porch, watching the sunset paint the fields in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere out there, George's experimental crops continue to grow, defying conventional agricultural science and representing both a priceless scientific treasure and a potential threat to powerful corporate interests. The sound of an approaching vehicle draws Michael's attention. A dark SUV with government plates slows as it passes the farm entrance, then continues down the road. Not stopping, but definitely observing. Michael makes a mental note of the license plate. Better to be cautious than sorry. Later that night, after the children have gone to bed, Michael sits at George's desk, reading through the research journals by lamplight. The old botanist's handwriting flows across the pages, meticulous and precise, documenting discoveries that should have changed the world, but instead were buried in obscurity. One entry from July 1934 catches Michael's attention: third consecutive year of drought, regional crop failures at 78%, test plots showing remarkable resilience. Control seeds died within 15 days of planting. Modified DR7 varieties maintain 85% yield despite water reduction. Department visitors impressed but skeptical. Kirkland suggested national security implications if results can be replicated at scale. Michael pauses, considering the implications. National security implications. In 1934, as the Dust Bowl devastated American agriculture and threatened a fundamental food crisis, George's drought-resistant crops would indeed have represented a matter of national security. He turns the page, finding an entry from September 1935. Meeting with USDA Dust Bowl Emergency Response Team, presented complete data sets on DR7 and SR12 varieties. Potential for immediate deployment in hardest-hit regions. Authorization to establish 4 additional test sites in Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, Texas. Funding approved under classified directive. Still uncomfortable with military presence at briefings. Military presence classified directive. Michael flips through the journal, searching for additional references. He finds another entry from February 1936. Colonel Westmore visited today with representatives from War Department. Disturbing conversation about strategic agricultural assets and controlled deployment protocols. Reminded them my work is intended to feed people, not advance military objectives. Atmosphere tense, Janet worried. We'll proceed with caution. Michael leans back in his chair, processing this new information. George's research hadn't just attracted academic interest. It had drawn attention from the highest levels of government, including military officials. The implications are staggering. In the years leading up to World War II, drought-resistant crops that could ensure food security, regardless of environmental conditions, would have been considered vital strategic assets. The question that haunts Michael as he finally goes to bed is simple. If George's work was considered a matter of national security in the 1930s, what would it be considered today in an era of climate change and global food insecurity, and what would certain interests do to control it? The next morning brings rain, heavy droplets drumming against the roof of the old farmhouse. Michael stands at the kitchen window, watching the storm transform the landscape. The fields drink thirstily, but George's experimental plants remain resilient, their modified structures designed to thrive in any conditions. Ashley joins him, clutching her mother's journal. Dad, I found something important. Mom wrote about a second storage site. Listen to this. Grandpa showed me his special hiding place today. He says it's where he keeps his most important seeds, the ones that could change everything. It's under the old oak tree where the three creeks meet. He made me promise never to tell anyone except someone I trust completely. Michael studies the property map spread out on the kitchen table, tracing the blue lines that represent the seasonal waterways crossing the farm. Near the eastern boundary, three small creeks converge near a stand of oak trees. A location not marked on any of George's research maps. A deliberate omission. A final safeguard. The rain has intensified, but Michael's determination is stronger. They don waterproof gear and make their way across the sodden fields toward the eastern boundary. The normally dry creek beds have come alive with rushing water, the confluence creating a small, turbulent pool near the largest oak tree. The ground around the tree is saturated, making digging difficult. But Jason, with a child's persistence, notices something the adults miss: a small metal ring embedded in one of the oak's massive roots. When pulled, it reveals a narrow access panel ingeniously disguised as part of the tree's natural structure. Inside is a waterproof metal container, its surface etched with a simple message: "For Laura when the time comes." Michael's hands tremble as he carefully extracts the container. Laura never found this. George's final secret remained waiting, preserved for decades until this moment. Back at the house, they open the container on the kitchen table. Inside is a sealed glass tube containing seeds, along with a letter in George's handwriting, dated April 1985, just 2 months before his death. My dearest Laura, if you're reading this, the time has come for the truth to emerge. These seeds represent my life's work. Not merely drought-resistant crops, but something far more significant. What began in 1934 as an effort to combat the Dust Bowl evolved into something I never anticipated. The plants I developed don't just survive harsh conditions, they actively restore damaged ecosystems. The DR7 wheat varieties can extract toxins from contaminated soil. The SR12 legumes can neutralize radioactive isotopes. The TR3 root vegetables can render chemical weapons residue inert. In 1943, when the government fully understood these capabilities, my research was classified under national security protocols. I was ordered to halt all public disclosure and surrender my work to military oversight. They envisioned these plants as defensive weapons, biological shields against chemical and nuclear warfare. I refused. These discoveries were meant to feed people, heal the earth, not advance military objectives. My resistance led to my professional disgrace. My research was discredited, my reputation destroyed. But I couldn't allow this technology to be weaponized. The seeds in this container represent the most advanced varieties I developed, what I call the restoration series. They can rehabilitate land damaged by nuclear testing, chemical spills, or industrial pollution. In the right hands, they could heal the wounds we've inflicted on our planet. Trust your heart to know when and how to use them. The world may not have been ready in my lifetime, but perhaps it is in yours. With all my love, Grandfather. The kitchen falls silent as the implications of George's letter sink in. Ashley is the first to speak. He wasn't just creating drought-resistant crops. He was developing plants that could clean up nuclear and chemical contamination. Jason's eyes widen with understanding. That's why the military got involved. They wanted to use his plants to protect against nuclear war. Michael rereads the letter, feeling the weight of George's moral choice. The botanist had sacrificed his reputation, his legacy, rather than allow his life-giving discoveries to be weaponized. The seeds, we need to protect them. If they can do what George claims, they're more valuable than anything on this farm. Michael carefully reseals the glass tube, placing it in the fireproof safe they'd found in the basement. As he closes the safe door, the sound of vehicles approaching draws him to the window. Two black SUVs roll up the driveway, followed by a sedan bearing the Americrop corporate logo. The convoy stops and 5 men emerge. Michael recognizes James Whitfield from his previous visit. The others are strangers, 2 in business suits, 2 in what appear to be the security uniforms. Michael turns to his children, his voice low and urgent. Ashley, take Jason to the barn. Use the exit through the back stall. Go to Eleanor Wright's house. Show her George's letter. Don't talk to anyone else. But Dad, no arguments. Go now. I'll handle this. As the children slip out the back door, Michael takes a deep breath, centers himself, and moves to the front porch to confront his uninvited visitors. Mr. Turner, beautiful property you have here. Whitfield's smile doesn't reach his eyes, which scan the farmhouse with calculated assessment. I don't recall inviting you back, Mr. Whitfield. Whitfield gestures to the men beside him. I've brought some colleagues who are very interested in your farm's history. This is Dr. Markham, our Chief Research Officer, and Mr. Edwards from our legal department. We'd like to discuss a significant opportunity with you. I'm not interested in selling. Whitfield's smile tightens. This isn't about buying your property, Mr. Turner. It's about something much more valuable. We know about Dr. Mason's research. We know about the experimental crops. And we know about the military applications he was developing. Michael keeps his expression neutral, though his heart pounds. I have no idea what you're talking about. The older man, Dr. Markham, steps forward. Mr. Turner, I knew your wife's grandfather. I was a junior researcher at Americrop when we first approached him in 1980. He was brilliant but misguided about how his work should be utilized. We're offering you the chance to correct his mistake and secure your family's future in the process. Michael studies Markham, noting the calculating intelligence behind his scholarly appearance. What exactly are you proposing? Whitfield interjects, his corporate smoothness returning. A research partnership. Americrop provides the resources to develop Dr. Mason's varieties. You receive appropriate compensation and recognition. We have the infrastructure to bring these innovations to market globally. Everyone benefits. And if I decline, the man identified as Edwards speaks for the first time, his tone carrying the practiced precision of a legal threat. That would be unfortunate. Our preliminary analysis indicates several of Dr. Mason's experimental varieties may infringe on Americrop patents. Litigation would be costly and time-consuming. Additionally, unregistered experimental crops could trigger regulatory interventions, EPA violations, USDA sanctions. This property could be placed under quarantine pending years of environmental assessment. The implicit threat hangs in the air. Michael maintains his composure, though inwardly he's calculating options, weighing risks. I'll need time to consider your offer. Whitfield nods, seemingly satisfied. Of course, we understand this is a significant decision. We'll leave you our proposal to review. He hands Michael a thick envelope. We'll expect your response within 48 hours. This is a limited time opportunity, Mr. Turner. As the Americrop contingent returns to their vehicles, Michael remains on the porch watching until they disappear down the driveway. Only then does he allow his shoulders to slump, the tension of the confrontation finally showing in his posture. The proposal envelope feels heavy in his hand, not just with paper, but with the weight of the choice it represents. Inside will be numbers, likely substantial ones, designed to tempt him into surrendering George's legacy to the very company the botanist had resisted until his death. Michael turns back to the house, his mind racing. Americrop knows more than they should about George's research. Someone has been feeding them information. Perhaps Scott, perhaps someone else. The tightening circle of interest around the farm suggests time is running short. He opens the envelope, scanning the document inside. The financial offer is staggering. $5 million for exclusive rights to George's research, with potential royalties that could triple that amount. More money than Michael could earn in several lifetimes. Enough to secure his children's futures, to rebuild his life after Laura's death. But as he reads the fine print, the true nature of the agreement becomes clear. Americrop would have complete control over which varieties were developed and how they were deployed. The restoration capabilities George had valued most would be completely at their discretion. The agreement even includes a confidentiality clause that would prevent Michael from ever discussing the plant's full capabilities. A golden cage expertly constructed. Michael sets the proposal aside and reaches for his phone. He needs to warn Eleanor that Ashley and Jason are coming. He needs to tell them about Americrop's visit, but as he dials, he notices something alarming. The call fails to connect. He tries again with the same result. Moving through the house, he checks different locations, but the result is the same: no signal. The landline is equally dead. A dial tone, but calls won't connect. Even the internet connection has mysteriously failed. The farm has been effectively isolated from outside communication. Not a coincidence. A strategy. Michael moves quickly, gathering essential documents. George's letter key research journals, property deeds. He places them in a waterproof bag, which he then conceals in his jacket. If Americrop plans to escalate this confrontation, he won't be caught unprepared. The sound of another vehicle approaching draws him back to the window. This time, it's a county sheriff's cruiser moving slowly up the drive. Official involvement, the next logical escalation in Americrop's pressure campaign. Michael steps onto the porch as the sheriff exits his vehicle. Tom Branson has served Frederick County for 20 years, a decent man known for his fairness. But his expression today is grim official. Michael Turner, did he have a court order authorizing inspection of this property for potentially hazardous agricultural experiments? He hands Michael a document bearing an official seal. This is harassment, Tom. There's nothing hazardous here. Sheriff Branson's expression remains professionally neutral. I'm just doing my job, Michael. Americrop has filed a formal complaint alleging unauthorized biotechnology experiments. EPA and USDA have been notified. I need to verify whether restricted plant varieties are being cultivated here. Michael scans the court order, noting the judge's name. Harold Winters, known locally for his business-friendly rulings. This is a private residence. You need more than allegations for a search warrant. Branson shifts uncomfortably. The court disagrees. Look, Michael, make this easy on both of us. If there's nothing to find, let me do a quick inspection and I'll be on my way. Michael, make this easy on both of us. If there's nothing to find, let me do a quick inspection and I'll be on my way. Michael weighs his options. Refusal would only escalate the situation, potentially bringing in federal agencies. A tactical retreat might be wiser, fine, but I'm accompanying you every step of the way. The sheriff nods, visibly relieved to avoid confrontation. Fair enough, the inspection is thorough but not intrusive. Branson examines the barn and the greenhouse and the visible fields, but shows no interest in the wooded areas where George's experimental garden remains hidden. Michael realizes that Americrop doesn't know the exact locations of the test sites. They're fishing using official channels to gain access and information. As the sheriff completes his inspection, he makes notes on an official form. I don't see anything immediately concerning, but I'll have to file a report. Someone from the agricultural department will probably follow up. Another layer of pressure, another official thread in the web closing around the farm. After Branson departs, Michael returns to the house, checking his phone again. Still no signal. The isolation continues. He considers his options, calculating risks and evaluating escape routes. If Americrop is willing to manipulate law enforcement, their next moves could be more aggressive. The afternoon stretches into evening with no sign of Ashley and Jason returning. Michael trusts Eleanor Wright to keep them safe, but the separation weighs heavily. He keeps watch from the upstairs windows, observing the perimeter of the property, noting the occasional slow-moving vehicle on the distant road. Surveillance, almost certainly. As night falls, Michael prepares for potential escalation. He secures doors and windows, positions, emergency supplies, plans evacuation routes. The farmhouse that had once represented hope now feels like a fortress under siege. The irony isn't lost on him. George's life-giving plants have become the focus of a struggle that feels increasingly militaristic. A flash of headlights through the trees alerts Michael to another arrival. This time it's Eleanor Wright's university pickup, moving cautiously up the drive. Michael watches carefully, ensuring she isn't being followed before stepping onto the porch to meet her. Eleanor emerges from the truck alone, her expression grave. Your children are safe. I've left them with colleagues I trust completely. Michael feels a surge of gratitude. Thank you. Things have escalated quickly here. Eleanor nods, her academic demeanor replaced by something harder, more strategic. I expected as much after reading George's letter. Americrop doesn't just want his drought-resistant crops. They want the restoration series. Plants that can clean up nuclear and chemical contamination represent billions in potential environmental remediation contracts. Michael leads her inside, away from potential observation. They've isolated the farm. No phone service, no internet. The sheriff came with a court order. It's only going to escalate from here. Eleanor sets her briefcase on the kitchen table, opening it to reveal a satellite phone and what appears to be legal documents. I've made some calls to people who understand what's at stake here. Your great father-in-law wasn't just any botanist, Michael. He was part of a classified government program called Operation Seed Bank, a scientific response to the Dust Bowl that evolved into an environmental defense initiative during the early Cold War. Michael remembers the journal entries mentioning military involvement. George's letter mentioned he refused to let his work be weaponized. Eleanor nods, her expression solemn. And he paid a terrible price for that moral stand. When he refused to surrender his research to military control, they systematically destroyed his reputation. Every peer-reviewed journal rejected his papers. Research grants evaporated. Academic positions closed to him. He was effectively excommunicated from the scientific community. She removes a folder from her briefcase, opening it to reveal photocopies of classified documents. These were declassified in 2010 under a FOIA request for Dust Bowl recovery programs. Most names are redacted, but the project parameters match George's work as a count. The government spent millions developing drought-resistant crops with soil restoration capabilities, then buried the research when its potential for neutralizing nuclear and chemical contamination became clear. Michael studies the documents, noting the official Department of Defense headers and security classifications. Why suppress technology that could help people? Eleanor's laugh is bitter. Follow the money. The same companies that manufacture chemical weapons and nuclear delivery systems also own the environmental remediation firms that clean up contamination. Billions of dollars in contracts depend on contamination being difficult and expensive to address. George's plants would have made those costly services obsolete. The implications stagger Michael. Not just agricultural monopolies, but military-industrial interests aligned against George's innovations. So what do we do now? Eleanor straightens her academic slouch, replaced by military-like posture. We execute Operation Seedfall. What's that? Eleanor's smile is thin but determined. Something George planned for, apparently. After your children showed me his letter, I made some inquiries. There are people who've been waiting decades for George's work to resurface. People who believed in his vision of using these plants to heal rather than harm. She hands Michael what looks like a business card, but with only a name and phone number. Thomas Reynolds, former Department of Agriculture, later Environmental Protection Agency. He worked with George in the 1970s before Americrop forced him out of government service. He's been monitoring their activities ever since, building a network of allies across scientific and legal communities. He can help protect you and the research. Michael studies the card, weighing options and responsibilities. What exactly is Operation Seedfall? Secure distribution of George's seed varieties to multiple research institutions simultaneously. Once the genetics are documented and protected in multiple locations, Americrop can't suppress them. The knowledge becomes public domain, which is exactly what George wanted. It's a strategic countermove, elegant in its simplicity. Not fighting Americrop's power directly, but rendering it irrelevant through widespread dissemination of knowledge. How soon can we move? Eleanor checks her watch. Reynolds can have a team here by dawn. We need to document everything, collect viable samples from all test sites, then execute coordinated transport to 12 different research facilities across North America. Once the plants are established in multiple secured locations, we announce the discovery publicly, with irrefutable proof of George's original work and its suppression. Michael considers the plan, analyzing risks and contingencies. Americrop will try to stop us. They've already manipulated local law enforcement. They could escalate further. Eleanor's expression hardens. That's why we move quickly and decisively. Reynolds has resources, people who understand what's at stake and how to manage opposition, former military intelligence community environmental activists, people who've been fighting the corporations like Americrop for decades. For the first time since Americrop's visit, Michael feels a spark of hope. Not just resistance, but a coordinated counter-strategy with experienced allies. What do you need me to do? Gather all of George's research materials. Every notebook, every photograph, every seed sample you can find. We'll need comprehensive documentation to establish prior art and invalidate Americrop's patent claims. Michael nods, already mentally cataloging the materials scattered throughout the house. And what about Ashley and Jason? I won't put them at risk. Eleanor's expression softens. They're already on their way to Washington with trusted colleagues. Reynolds has arranged protective custody with people who understand the situation. They'll be safer there than here for the next 48 hours. Michael feels a pang at the separation, but acknowledges the logic. As they begin gathering George's research materials, Eleanor's satellite phone rings. Her conversation is brief but clearly concerning. We need to accelerate the timeline. Americrop has filed an emergency injunction seeking control of all plant materials on this property, claiming potential biohazard risks. A federal containment team has been authorized to secure the farm at first light. Michael's jaw tightens. They're not even pretending anymore. Eleanor is already moving her actions precise and efficient. Reynolds can have an extraction team here in 3 hours. We need to be ready to move everything by then. As they work through the night, systematically documenting and packing George's research, Michael feels a growing sense of purpose. This isn't just about protecting his family's inheritance or securing financial benefit. It's about fulfilling George Mason's vision, using science to heal rather than harm, to feed rather than control. The rain returns around midnight, a steady downpour that masks the sound of their activity and obscures visibility. A tactical advantage they hadn't anticipated, but gratefully accept. By 2 in the morning, every notebook has been photographed, every seed variety cataloged, every test site documented with GPS coordinates. Eleanor receives a text message on her satellite phone. Reynolds' team is 10 minutes out. 4-vehicle convoy approaching from the east. They'll hold at the tree line until we confirm readiness. Michael secures the final container of seed samples, sealing it carefully in a waterproof transport case. We're ready. As they prepare to move the materials to the extraction point, headlights suddenly illuminate the driveway. Vehicles approaching from the main road, not the eastern access route Reynolds' team is using. Americrop security. They must have accelerated their timeline too. Michael's military training, long dormant but never forgotten, kicks in automatically. He assesses the situation with tactical clarity. How many vehicles? Eleanor peers through the rain-streaked window. 2 SUVs, at least 4 personnel visible. Private security, not law enforcement. Michael nods, decision made. We'll use the storm cellar exit. It connects to the drainage system that runs toward the eastern boundary. We can meet Reynolds' team at the extraction point while Americrop searches the house. As Americrop's security team approaches the farmhouse, Michael and Eleanor slip away through the century-old storm cellar, navigating the narrow drainage tunnel by flashlight. The rain has made the passage treacherous, but also covers their tracks and masks any sound of their movement. They emerge near the eastern boundary where the 3 creeks converge, the location of George's final seed cache. 4 unmarked vehicles wait at the tree line, their lights extinguished. A figure approaches through the rain, tall, military-bearing, late 60s, but moving with the precision of someone decades younger. Michael Turner, Thomas Reynolds. I've waited a long time to meet George Mason's successor. The handshake is firm, the eyes evaluating but not unkind. You've got about 20 minutes before Americrop realizes you're gone and expands their search perimeter. My team will handle the extraction. Dr. Wright has briefed me on the materials we're securing. Eleanor nods, gesturing to the cases they've brought. Complete documentation, viable samples from all test sites, and the restoration series seeds from George's hidden cache. Reynolds examines one of the seed containers, his expression revealing deep understanding of its significance. I worked with George in 1975 during the final classified trials of the restoration series. The results were extraordinary. Complete remediation of chemical weapon residue within 1 growing season. When he refused to weaponize the technology, they destroyed him professionally. I've spent 40 years waiting for this moment. He turns to his team, issuing quiet, efficient orders. The research materials are distributed among the vehicles, redundancy built into the transportation plan. No single interception could capture all the samples. As the last case is secured, Reynolds turns back to Michael. You have a choice to make, Mr. Turner. You can come with us, join the effort to protect and distribute George's work. Or you can return to the farm, claim ignorance of tonight's activities, fight Americrop through legal channels while we establish scientific validation of the plant's capabilities. Michael considers the options, weighing personal risk against strategic advantage. Where are my children safe under protection in Washington? They can join you either way. Michael makes his decision. I'll return to the farm. If I disappear, Americrop will know we've moved the research. If I stay, maintain ignorance of your operation, I can buy time while you establish secure research sites. Reynolds nods, respecting the tactical logic. It's the riskier path for you personally. Michael's smile is grim but determined. George stood his ground for decades. I can manage a few days. As Reynolds' team prepares to depart, Eleanor approaches Michael, concern evident in her expression. Are you sure about this? Americrop won't be gentle when they realize what's happened? I'm sure to. This farm is George's legacy. I won't abandon it. Reynolds hands Michael a small device that resembles a key fob, emergency beacon. If the situation becomes untenable, activate it. Extraction team will respond within 30 minutes. The rain has intensified, turning the ground to mud and reducing visibility to mere yards. As Reynolds' vehicles slip away into the darkness, Michael begins the return journey to the farmhouse. The property that had once seemed a burden now represents something far more significant, a battleground in a decades-long struggle between corporate control and scientific freedom. By the time Michael returns through the storm cellar, Americrop's security team has completed their initial search of the house. He can hear them in the upper floors, methodical and professional. He waits in the darkness of the cellar until they move to the barn, then slips back into the kitchen, creating the impression he's been there all along. When they finally discover him, his surprise seems genuine. What the hell is going on? Who authorized you to enter my home? The security team leader, former military, Michael suspects from his bearing, produces legal documents. Emergency inspection order, sir. Potential agricultural contamination. We're authorized to secure all experimental plant materials and research documentation. Michael allows his genuine anger to show. This is private property. You have no right to be here without law enforcement present. The security leader remains professionally detached. We've documented your objection, sir. Our inspection will continue as authorized. Through the early morning hours, Michael maintains his role, the indignant homeowner unaware of the true value of his property, protesting the intrusion, but ultimately powerless to prevent it. He watches as they search methodically for research materials that are already miles away, being distributed to secure locations across the region. By dawn, Americrop's frustration is evident. The security team has found only empty hiding places and basic farming equipment, none of the valuable research materials they sought. Their leader makes a call, speaking in hushed tones. Michael catches fragments. No primary materials located, and secondary containment protocols recommended. As morning light breaks across the horizon, more vehicles arrive. Not Americrop security this time, but official government transport. Men in hazardous material suits emerge, establishing a perimeter around the property. A man in a dark suit approaches Michael with official identification. Environmental Protection Agency Biohazard Containment Division. Mr. Turner, this property is being placed under quarantine pending investigation of potential agricultural contamination. You'll need to vacate immediately. The house and all structures will be sealed for evaluation. Michael's protest is genuine. This is my home. You can't just force me out based on unfounded allegations. The EPA official remains impassive. Sir, we have documented evidence of unauthorized experimental crops being cultivated on this property. Federal regulations require containment and assessment. You'll be provided temporary housing during the investigation. Michael recognizes the strategy. Unable to locate George's research materials, Americrop has leveraged government connections to seize control of the entire property. A scorched earth approach when surgical extraction failed. As he is escorted from his home, Michael maintains his cover, the bewildered homeowner caught in bureaucratic overreach. He allows himself to be processed through the containment protocols, submitting to decontamination procedures and official documentation. All the while, he's calculating timelines, estimating how long Reynolds' team needs to establish secure research sites. The temporary housing turns out to be a hotel room in Winchester, expenses covered by EPA contingency funds. The official who delivers him there is apologetic but firm. Mr. Turner is not to return to the farm until clearance is granted. The investigation timeline is indefinite. Once alone, Michael activates the secure communication device Reynolds provided, a specially modified tablet with encrypted connectivity that bypasses standard networks. The message waiting for him is concise but reassuring. Packages secure at all 12 destinations. Initial verification complete. Children safe at location Bluebird. Estimated 72 hours until scientific validation. Maintain position and cover identity. Michael allows himself a moment of satisfaction. The first phase of Operation Seedfall has succeeded. Georgia's research materials and viable samples are now distributed across multiple secure locations, being independently verified by trusted scientists. Americrop's attempt to contain and control the discovery has failed, but the war is far from over. Americrop still controls the farm itself using government agencies as proxies. They'll be searching for any remaining traces of Georgia's work and for any evidence of where the primary materials have gone. The next phase will be critical, establishing irrefutable scientific validation of Georgia's discoveries while building legal protection against Americrop's inevitable countermoves. Michael settles in for the waiting game, knowing that somewhere teams of scientists are already growing Georgia's remarkable plants under controlled conditions, documenting their extraordinary capabilities. The tablet chimes with another encrypted message, this one including a video file. Michael opens it to find Ashley and Jason safe in what appears to be a university laboratory. Ashley holds up a seedling, one of Georgia's experimental varieties already sprouting in its new protected environment. Jason speaks excitedly. Dad, you won't believe this. Dr. Reynolds showed us great-grandpa's special wheat growing in a chamber filled with contaminated soil. It's actually pulling the chemicals out of the ground. They say it could clean up toxic waste sites in months instead of decades. Ashley more measured but equally enthusiastic. The scientists here say great-grandpa was decades ahead of his time. They're calling his work the most significant agricultural breakthrough since nitrogen fixation was discovered. They say it could help feed billions of people. The video ends with both children sending their love, promising to see him soon. Michael feels a profound sense of vindication for George Mason, the visionary scientist whose work was suppressed but never truly defeated. As evening approaches, Michael's tablet alerts him to breaking news, a bulletin from the agricultural science community announcing a significant discovery of drought-resistant crop varieties with unprecedented soil restoration capabilities. The announcement is careful, making no mention of George Mason or the Turner farm, but the implications are clear. The scientific validation process has begun. Within hours, more detailed reports emerge from multiple research institutions, all documenting the same extraordinary plant varieties with their remarkable capabilities. The coordinated release makes suppression impossible, too many independent sources confirming the same findings simultaneously. By nightfall, financial news outlets are reporting dramatic fluctuations in Americrop's stock value as investors react to the potential market disruption these new plant varieties represent. Agricultural technology forums are buzzing with speculation about the origin and ownership of the revolutionary crops. Michael monitors the developments with grim satisfaction. The strategy is working exactly as Reynolds had planned, a distributed revelation too widespread to contain, too well documented to discredit. The next morning brings a visitor, James Whitfield from Americrop, his corporate smoothness replaced by barely contained fury. You have no idea what you've done, Turner. No idea of the forces you're messing with. Michael maintains his cover, projecting confusion and indignation. I don't know what you're talking about. I've been forcibly removed from my home by hazmat teams that you apparently sent. I should be suing you for harassment. Whitfield leans closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. We know the research materials are gone. We know they've been distributed to research facilities. What you don't know is that some of those plant varieties are classified technology. Your actions could be construed as espionage. Michael allows genuine surprise to show on his face. Espionage, they're plants, for God's sake. Plants that my wife's grandfather grew decades ago. Whitfield's expression shifts from anger to calculation. There's still a way to salvage this situation. Americrop is prepared to offer you full partnership in the commercial development of these varieties. $20 million upfront, plus ongoing royalties. And all we need is your public statement confirming Americrop's legitimate interest in Dr. Mason's work. The offer is tempting, life-changing money that could secure his family's future for generations. But Michael remembers George's letter, his moral stand against those who would weaponize or monopolize his life-giving discoveries. I don't think my wife's grandfather would approve of that partnership, Mr. Whitfield. From what I've learned, he spent his life fighting against exactly the kind of control you're proposing. Whitfield's face hardens. Then you've made your choice. Don't expect this to end well for you. After Whitfield departs, Michael receives another encrypted message from Reynolds. Phase 2 complete. Scientific validation established at all 12 sites. Original research documentation authenticated by independent experts. Press conference scheduled for tomorrow at National Agricultural Library. Your presence requested if possible. Extraction team standing by. The timing is perfect. Just as Americrop realizes they've lost control of the situation, the full public revelation is about to occur. Not just the plants themselves, but George's original research. The story of its suppression and its potential to address global food security and environmental remediation. Michael activates the extraction beacon. It's time to rejoin his children and take his place in the public unveiling of George Mason's legacy. Within 30 minutes, a nondescript sedan arrives at the hotel. The driver, another former military type, simply nods and says, "Reynolds sent me." As they drive toward Washington, Michael watches the Virginia countryside roll past. The farm is temporarily beyond his reach, but the truly valuable inheritance, George's scientific breakthrough, has been secured for humanity rather than corporate profit. News alerts continue to flood his tablet. More research institutions confirming the extraordinary capabilities of the newly discovered plant varieties. Agricultural stock markets in turmoil as investors recalculate the value of companies dependent on chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Environmental remediation firms facing shareholder questions about the impact of natural alternatives to their expensive technological solutions. A paradigm shift is underway exactly as George Mason had envisioned decades earlier. When they reach Washington, Michael is reunited with Ashley and Jason at a secure facility near the USDA headquarters. The children's excitement is contagious as they describe witnessing the scientific validation of their great-grandfather's work. Reynolds joins them accompanied by a distinguished group of agricultural scientists, environmental experts, and government officials. The atmosphere is electric with the sense of historical significance. Tomorrow's press conference will change everything, Reynolds explains. Not just for agriculture, but for environmental remediation, food security, and corporate accountability. Will present irrefutable evidence of George's original work, its deliberate suppression, and its extraordinary potential for addressing global challenges. Michael considers the journey that brought them here, from a seemingly worthless inheritance to the cusp of a global agricultural revolution. What happens to the farm? Reynolds smiles, the expression softening his military bearing. Once the press conference occurs, the EPA containment order becomes untenable. The alleged biohazard will be publicly recognized as a beneficial innovation. Americrop's legal maneuvers will collapse under public scrutiny. You should be able to return home within days. Ashley, ever practical, raises the critical question. But what about Americrop? Won't they still try to control great-grandpa's plants? Reynolds' expression turns serious. They'll certainly try. But we've established a prior art through George's original documentation. We've secured patent applications in your family's name with mandatory public licensing provisions. Most importantly, we've distributed knowledge too widely for it to be suppressed again. The genie is out of the bottle. As final preparations are made for the press conference, Michael steps away for a moment of quiet reflection. Through the facility's windows, he can see the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky, a symbol of enduring principles standing firm against changing political winds. He thinks about George Mason, the visionary scientist who sacrificed professional recognition rather than allow his life-giving discoveries to be weaponized or monopolized. He thinks about Laura, who kept faith in her grandfather's work even when others dismissed it as fantasy. And he thinks about the farm, not worthless after all, but priceless in ways no one could have imagined. Tomorrow, George Mason's legacy will finally emerge from decades of suppression. His extraordinary plants, designed to feed the hungry, heal damaged environments and free farmers from corporate dependency, will become known to the world. The seeds of conflict that Americrop tried to control will instead blossom into something revolutionary hope. Michael rejoins his children and their allies, ready for the final phase of Operation Seedfall, the public revelation that will transform a family inheritance into a global legacy. The farmhouse may stand empty tonight, but its true value has already been secured, not in dollars, but in the potential to change countless lives for the better, just as George Mason had intended all along. The National Agricultural Library stands like a monument to mankind's relationship with the land, a modern structure of glass and steel housing centuries of agricultural knowledge. As dawn breaks over Washington, journalists and scientists gather in the main auditorium, drawn by mysterious invitations promising a revelation that will fundamentally transform global agriculture and environmental remediation. Michael Turner stands backstage watching the growing crowd through a gap in the curtains. After days of isolation and subterfuge, the moment of revelation has arrived. Ashley and Jason wait beside him, their faces a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This is their heritage too, the culmination of their great-grandfather's life work. Thomas Reynolds approaches his military bearing, softened by the gravity of the moment. Everything is in place. 12 independent research teams have verified George's work. The patents have been filed under the Mason-Turner Family Trust with mandatory public licensing provisions. Once we make this announcement, there's no going back. Michael nods, understanding the historic threshold they're about to cross. Is Americrop aware of this press conference? Reynolds' smile is grim. Their legal team delivered cease and desist orders to all 12 research facilities this morning. Too late. The scientific validation is complete, the documentation overwhelming. They're scrambling to contain what can't be contained. The auditorium has filled to capacity. Agricultural scientists, environmental experts, government officials, and media representatives from around the world. Dr. Eleanor Wright steps to the podium, her academic demeanor carrying new authority as she calls the assembly to order. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on such short notice. Today we announce a discovery that represents not just a scientific breakthrough, but the resurrection of work deliberately suppressed for over half a century. What you're about to see will change our understanding of what's possible in agricultural science and environmental remediation. The lights dim and a video presentation begins, a montage of George Mason's experimental plants growing in controlled laboratory conditions. Time-lapse footage shows wheat varieties extracting chemical contaminants from polluted soil. Split-screen comparisons demonstrate crops thriving in drought conditions, while standard varieties wither and die. Microscopic imaging reveals cellular structures unlike anything in conventional agriculture. As the lights rise, Reynolds takes the podium, his voice resonating with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to briefing officials at the highest levels. These remarkable plants were developed by Dr. George Mason beginning in 1934 as part of the government's response to the Dust Bowl crisis. Dr. Mason created drought-resistant crop varieties that could have prevented the agricultural collapse that devastated the American heartland. But his work evolved into something far more significant: plants that could actively restore damaged ecosystems, extract toxins from contaminated soil, and establish permanent sustainable agriculture. The audience stirs scientific minds already calculating the implications. Reynolds continues, his tone hardening. When Dr. Mason refused to surrender control of his discoveries to military and corporate interests, his work was systematically suppressed. His research was classified, his reputation destroyed, and his innovations buried. Until now. Reynolds gestures to Michael, inviting him to the podium. As Michael steps forward, he feels the weight of George's legacy on his shoulders. The audience watches with rapt attention, this ordinary man at the center of an extraordinary scientific revelation. My name is Michael Turner. 6 months ago, I inherited a supposedly worthless farm from my late wife's family. What I found there was beyond imagination. The preserved work of my wife's grandfather, Dr. George Mason. Not just his research notes and experimental results, but living examples of his revolutionary plants, still growing and thriving after decades without human care. Michael gestures to the screen behind him, where photographs of George's hidden garden appear. The geometric test plots, the underground seed vault, the remarkable specimens defying conventional botany. Dr. Mason created these plants to feed people and heal the earth. He refused to allow his discoveries to be weaponized or monopolized. For that moral stand, he paid with his reputation and his legacy. Today, we fulfill his vision by making this work available to humanity rather than keeping it locked away for corporate profit. A hand raises in the audience, a distinguished agricultural scientist from the Midwest. Mr. Turner, these claims are extraordinary. What verification can you provide? Eleanor steps forward, her scientific credentials lending weight to her response. We anticipated that question, Dr. Harrington. Over the past 72 hours, 12 independent research facilities have conducted comprehensive analysis of Dr. Mason's plant varieties. Their findings have been documented according to strict scientific protocols and peer-reviewed by leading experts in botanical genetics, agricultural science, and environmental biology. Eleanor gestures and representatives from each research institution stand. Respected scientists from universities, agricultural research centers, and environmental organizations across North America. Each will provide detailed reports, but the conclusion is unanimous. Dr. Mason's plants demonstrate capabilities that exceed our current agricultural technology by decades. They represent a fundamental breakthrough in our ability to produce food in harsh conditions and restore environments damaged by industrial contamination. The revelation ripples through the audience, skepticism giving way to excitement as the scientific documentation is distributed. But not everyone is convinced. A man in an expensive suit rises from the back row, his corporate demeanor at odds with the academic atmosphere. James Whitfield, Chief Operating Officer, Ameri Crop Corporation. This presentation is highly irregular and potentially illegal. These alleged plant varieties may incorporate proprietary genetics developed by our company. We've already filed injunctions against this unauthorized disclosure. Reynolds responds with the calm assurance of someone who has anticipated every countermove. Mr. Whitfield, we have comprehensive documentation proving that Dr. Mason developed these varieties between 1934 and 1980, decades before your company filed its first patent applications in this field. Furthermore, we have evidence that Americrop deliberately suppressed Dr. Mason's work after he refused your acquisition attempts. Reynolds nods to an assistant who distributes additional documentation to key journalists and officials in the audience. This file contains internal Americrop communications detailing your company's campaign to discredit Dr. Mason and bury his discoveries. It also includes declassified government documents showing how corporate interests manipulated regulatory agencies to prevent his work from reaching the public. Whitfield's face darkens as he scans the documents being passed through the audience. This is corporate espionage. You'll be hearing from our attorneys. Reynolds remains unperturbed. Actually, Mr. Whitfield, the Attorney General's office, will be hearing from us. The antitrust implications of your company's actions are significant. Deliberately suppressing innovation to maintain market control violates several federal statutes. A woman rises from the middle of the auditorium, her press credentials identifying her as a senior environmental reporter for a major news organization. Dr. Wright, could you elaborate on the environmental remediation capabilities of these plants? The implications for contaminated sites worldwide could be revolutionary. Eleanor responds with controlled enthusiasm, the scientist in her careful not to overstate the documented results. The varieties we're calling the Restoration Series can extract specific contaminants from soil and water systems. Initial testing shows 87% reduction in petroleum hydrocarbons within one growing season. Heavy metal sequestration at rates 300% more efficient than current phytoremediation techniques. Perhaps most remarkably, certain varieties demonstrate limited ability to neutralize radioactive isotopes, though that capability requires further study under controlled conditions. The implications ripple through the room. Another journalist stands. Mr. Reynolds, given the potential impact on global food security, what's your plan for distribution of these plant varieties? Reynolds gestures to Michael, deferring to the family's wishes. Michael steps forward, his response revealing the moral compass that guides this entire endeavor. These plants were created to help people, not enrich corporations. The Mason-Turner Family Trust has filed patents with a specific purpose, not to restrict access, but to prevent any single entity from monopolizing this technology. All varieties will be available through open licensing, with mandatory provisions for humanitarian deployment in food-insecure regions. The announcement triggers an eruption of questions from the assembled press. As the scientific and media representatives digest the implications, Whitfield slips out of the auditorium, phone already pressed to his ear. Reynolds notices his departure and murmurs to Michael, Phase 3 complete. Public disclosure achieved. Now we prepare for the counterattack. Michael watches the journalists spreading the news to the world, understanding that while a critical victory has been won, the war is far from over. Powerful interests don't surrender billion-dollar monopolies without a fight. But for this moment, as Ashley and Jason join him at the podium to answer questions about their great-grandfather's legacy, Michael allows himself to feel the satisfaction of fulfilling George Mason's vision. The truth has emerged from decades of suppression and nothing, not corporate power, not government classification, not deliberate disinformation, can force it back into the shadows. The days following the press conference unfold with dizzying speed. News outlets worldwide carry the story of George Mason's revolutionary plants and their suppression. Agricultural futures markets fluctuate wildly as investors recalculate the value of companies dependent on chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and hybrid seeds that farmers must repurchase annually. Environmental organizations hail the Restoration Series as a potential solution to toxic sites previously considered permanently damaged. Humanitarian groups focus on the drought-resistant varieties' potential to address food insecurity in regions affected by climate change. Americrop's response is swift and multi-pronged. Their public relations department issues statements questioning the scientific validation and suggesting the plants may pose unknown environmental risks. Their legal team files lawsuits against everyone connected to Operation Seedfall, alleging patent infringement, corporate espionage, and violation of confidentiality agreements. Most concerning, their government relations division leverages decades of political influence, pressing for regulatory intervention on grounds of unassessed biological agents with potential national security implications. Michael, Ashley, and Jason remain in protective custody in Washington, monitoring developments from a secure facility as Reynolds' team navigates the corporate and political minefields. Daily video conferences keep them informed of both progress and setbacks. 7 days after the press conference, Reynolds delivers mixed news. The EPA containment order on your farm has been lifted. The scientific evidence was too overwhelming to maintain the fiction of a biohazard risk. You can return home whenever you're ready, but there's a complication. Americrop has filed a civil action claiming ownership interest in any plants derived from Dr. Mason's work based on a 1979 consulting agreement he allegedly signed. They've requested an emergency injunction to prevent any distribution of seeds or plants until ownership is legally determined, a process that could take years. Michael's jaw tightens. They're trying to bury this in litigation. Delay until they can develop their own versions or acquire control through legal attrition. Reynolds nods, understanding the strategy all too well. Classic corporate tactic. They can't win on the scientific merits, so they're shifting to legal and regulatory battlegrounds, where money and influence can delay justice indefinitely. Ashley, who has been studying George's notebooks with growing understanding, interjects with the pragmatism that increasingly reminds Michael of her mother. But they've missed something important. Great-grandpa's notes show he created fail-safes against exactly this scenario. Reynolds looks at her with new interest. What kind of fail-safes? Ashley opens one of George's later journals to a carefully marked page. He engineered certain varieties to produce viable seeds only under specific environmental conditions he created in his experimental garden. Without those precise conditions, the plants grow but don't reproduce effectively. Jason joins the conversation, his innate understanding of the plants growing daily. That's why he established multiple test sites across the property. Each one creates the specific conditions needed for different varieties. It's like a combination lock. You need all the elements in the right proportion. Michael studies his children with pride, seeing George's scientific ingenuity and Laura's intelligence living on in them. So even if Americrop obtained samples, they couldn't propagate them effectively without knowing the environmental triggers. Reynolds processes this information, tactical mind, already calculating the strategic advantage. That would explain why they're so desperate to control the farm itself. It's not just the plants, it's the specialized growing environments Dr. Mason established. Eleanor Wright, who has been coordinating the scientific analysis, adds her perspective. This is consistent with the propagation challenges we're seeing in laboratory settings. The plants grow readily enough, but seed production is minimal unless specific soil chemistry, photoperiod, and microbial conditions are present. Michael considers the implications. So we have a stronger position than we realized. Without access to George's test sites and his complete methodology, Americrop can't effectively propagate the most valuable varieties. Reynolds nods, a new strategy already forming. This changes our approach. Instead of fighting Americrop's legal maneuvers directly, we accelerate the public release of basic varieties, while securing the advanced restoration series until full scientific documentation is complete. Michael agrees, but with a condition that reflects George's original vision. The drought-resistant varieties need to reach farmers immediately, especially in developing regions already facing climate impacts. No licensing fees, no restrictions, just open distribution through agricultural extension programs. Reynolds recognizes the moral imperative, even as his pragmatic side calculates the strategic benefits. Widespread distribution makes it impossible for Americrop to contain the technology. Once farmers around the world are growing these varieties, no court injunction can put that genie back in the bottle. As they finalize this adjusted strategy, an alert sounds on Reynolds' secure tablet. His expression darkens as he reads the incoming message. We have a problem. Americrop has filed a sealed national security petition with the Defense Department claiming Dr. Mason's work originated in classified military research. They're requesting that all materials be placed under national security protection, which would effectively give them control through their defense contracts. The room falls silent as the implications sink in. Michael breaks the silence, his voice hard with determination. They're trying to classify the research to hide it again, just like they did to George. Eleanor responds with uncharacteristic emotion. This is unconscionable. Using national security claims to suppress technology that could address global hunger and environmental degradation. Reynolds is already coordinating a response, fingers flying across his tablet. We've anticipated this move. Our contacts in the Agriculture Department and EPA are preparing counterbriefs arguing that the public benefit outweighs any security concerns. But these battles take time. Time Americrop will use to develop containment strategies. Michael considers their options, remembering George's decades-long struggle against these same forces. A decision crystallizes in his mind. We can't wait for the legal process. We need to return to the farm immediately. It's time for the final phase of Operation Seedfall. Reynolds studies him carefully, recognizing the resolve in his expression. You have something in mind. Michael nods, a plan taking shape. George didn't just leave us his research. He left us a strategic reserve, ready to deploy when the moment was right. 3 days later, Michael, Ashley, and Jason returned to the farm under the watchful protection of Reynolds' security team. The EPA containment barriers have been removed, but evidence of the intrusive investigation remains. Disturbed soil where samples were taken, monitoring equipment abandoned in the haste of withdrawal, bureaucratic debris of a failed containment operation. The farmhouse stands silent, waiting for their return. As they walk through the rooms, Michael notes the signs of Americrop's search. Subtle disturbances in the dust patterns, items not quite where they had been left. But the most invasive examination has been in the fields and wooded areas where trenches and soil cores reveal a systematic search for George's experimental plots. Michael leads his children and Reynolds to the barn, where they gather around the worn wooden table that has served generations of farmers. Americrop found some of the test sites, but not all of them. And they definitely missed the most important one. Reynolds studies the property map Michael has spread across the table. You mentioned a strategic reserve. Michael nods, indicating a location deep in the wooded area at the property's eastern boundary. In his final years, George established what he called the continuity garden. It's not on any of his research maps. He only mentioned it in personal letters to my wife when she was a child. It contains mature specimens of every variety he developed, planted in a sustainable ecosystem designed to maintain itself indefinitely. Eleanor examines the topographical features of the indicated area. Perfect site selection. Natural water collection protected from prevailing winds, multiple microclimate zones within a confined area. Your great-grandfather was thinking in terms of decades, not research cycles. Ashley points to the location where they had found George's final message. That's near where we found the waterproof container with the Restoration Series seeds in Grandpa's letter. Reynolds considers the strategic implications. If this continuity garden contains viable examples of all his varieties growing in their specialized environments, Michael completes the thought, then we have everything we need to propagate the plants indefinitely, regardless of Americrop's legal maneuvers or government classification attempts. Jason, who has been studying the property boundaries, notices something significant. Dad, look at this. Part of that wooded area extends beyond our property line into the national forest land. If great-grandpa planted specimens there too. Reynolds immediately grasps the implication. Then they'd be growing on federal land, technically outside private ownership disputes. That would significantly complicate Americrop's legal claims. As they prepare to investigate, the continuity garden, Reynolds' secure communication device alerts him to an incoming message. His expression remains neutral, but Michael detects the tension in his posture. Americrop has accelerated their timeline. The Defense Department review of their national security petition has been fast-tracked. Decision expected within 48 hours. Michael understands the implication. They've found leverage with someone in the Pentagon. Reynolds nods grimly. We need to assume the classification order will be approved. That gives us less than 2 days to document the continuity garden and execute the final distribution. They move with renewed urgency, gathering supplies for an extended exploration of the wooded eastern boundary. As they prepare to depart, the sound of approaching vehicles draws them to the barn entrance. 2 black SUVs approach along the farm's main drive. Not government vehicles this time, but private security. Americrop maintaining surveillance despite the lifted containment order. Reynolds assesses the situation with professional detachment. Standard intimidation tactic. They'll establish observation posts at the property boundaries, monitor movements, attempt to track anyone entering or leaving. Michael considers their options, military training providing clarity in the developing confrontation. We'll use the creek bed approach through the north pasture. The topography provides cover all the way to the eastern woods. They won't be able to maintain visual contact without trespassing, which they're not ready to risk yet. Reynolds approves the tactical assessment with a nod. I'll have our perimeter team create a diversion at the south boundary. Make them think we're conducting activities there while we investigate the continuity garden. As the security team implements these measures, Michael leads his children, Eleanor and Reynolds, along the concealed route to the eastern woods. The late afternoon sun filters through the oak canopy, creating dappled shadows that further obscure their movement from distant observation. The area where the 3 creeks converge has recovered from the recent rains, but evidence of water flow remains in the saturated ground and debris caught in low-hanging branches. The massive oak tree where they had found George's waterproof container stands like a sentinel at the edge of a natural clearing. Beyond it, almost invisible unless you know what to look for, a narrow path winds deeper into the woods. As they follow this subtle trail, the vegetation gradually changes, becoming more diverse, more vibrant, with species that seem out of place in the Virginia woodland. Eleanor's scientific eye catches the anomalies immediately. These plant communities aren't natural assemblages. They've been carefully composed. Nitrogen fixers paired with heavy feeders, pest repellent species protecting more vulnerable varieties. This is intentional permaculture design. The path leads to a clearing unlike anything they have seen before. A perfect circle approximately 100 feet in diameter, surrounded by mature trees that create a protected microclimate. Within this natural enclosure, concentric rings of plants grow in carefully maintained beds, separated by narrow walkways of packed earth. Ashley recognizes the organization immediately from George's notebooks. It's the master design, great-grandpa's integrated ecosystem model. He theorized that properly balanced plant communities could sustain themselves indefinitely without human intervention. Eleanor moves through the garden with growing amazement, identifying varieties they've seen in George's test plots, but in more mature established forms. These are the parent plants, complete specimens of every variety he developed growing together in a self-sustaining system. The soil chemistry, microbial balance, even the insect populations, all deliberately managed through plant selection and arrangement. Jason, who has ventured to the far side of the clearing, calls out with excitement. Dad, there's another clearing through here, and another beyond that. Reynolds follows, then returns with confirmation. 3 additional gardens, each with different environmental parameters. And yes, they do extend onto federal forest land. Approximately 40% of the total installation is outside your property boundaries. Michael surveys this extraordinary legacy, not just plants, but a complete ecological design intended to preserve George's work regardless of human interference. The magnitude of his great father-in-law's foresight humbles him. He didn't just create new plant varieties. He established a permanent living seed bank that could survive without maintenance, hidden where it wouldn't be discovered until the right time. As they begin documenting the continuity garden, cataloging species, and collecting samples according to Eleanor's scientific protocols, Reynolds maintains communication with his security team, monitoring Americrop's movements. The corporate security detail has established 3 observation posts around the farm perimeter, but shows no sign of more aggressive action. The documentation process continues through the evening and into the night, portable lights illuminating their work as they create comprehensive records of George's living legacy. By dawn, they have collected seeds from every major variety, documented the growing conditions of each specialized garden, and mapped the entire installation using GPS coordinates. Reynolds receives an encrypted update as the sun rises over the eastern ridge. Pentagon sources confirm the classification order will be signed by end of day. Once executed, all research materials related to Dr. Mason's work will be subject to national security controls. Michael knows what this means. Americrop's defense contracts will give them access to the classified research, while public distribution will be prohibited under federal law. The same strategy that buried George's work 40 years ago deployed once again. But this time they're prepared. Eleanor has completed her scientific assessment of the continuity garden, her academic reserve giving way to undisguised admiration. This installation isn't just a preservation system, it's a regenerative distribution mechanism. These mature plants produce seeds specifically adapted to spread through natural vectors, wind-water animals. They're designed to establish themselves beyond the boundaries of the protected area. Michael understands the implication. George wasn't just preserving his work. He was creating a system that would eventually distribute it naturally regardless of human interference. Reynolds, ever focused on the immediate strategic situation, brings them back to the pressing reality. We have less than 12 hours before the classification order takes effect. We need to execute the final phase of Operation Seedfall now. Michael nods, decision made. Eleanor, is your team ready for the global distribution? Eleanor confirms with quiet confidence. Agricultural extension offices in 27 countries are standing by. The moment we give the signal, the basic drought-resistant varieties will be released to farmers in the regions most affected by climate change. No restrictions, no licensing fees, just as George intended. Reynolds adds a security perspective. Once distributed globally, no classification order can effectively contain the technology. It would be like trying to classify rainfall. Michael turns to his children, recognizing that this moment belongs to them as much as to him. They are George's direct descendants, the inheritors of his scientific legacy and moral vision. Ashley and Jason, this is your heritage too. The decision should be yours as much as mine. Once we release these seeds to the world, there's no going back. Ashley speaks first, her young face solemn with the weight of the decision. Mom always said great-grandpa wanted his plants to help people, not to make money or win awards, but to feed people who were hungry and heal land that was damaged. I think we should do what he wanted, Jason nods agreement, his expression reflecting the simple clarity of youth. Great-grandpa spent his whole life making plants that could help people. Then bad people tried to stop him. We shouldn't let them win. Michael feels a surge of pride in his children's moral compass, so aligned with George's original vision and Laura's unwavering faith in her grandfather's work. He turns to Eleanor and Reynolds' decision made. Send the signal. Release the seeds. Eleanor activates her satellite communication device, sending the prearranged code that will trigger simultaneous distribution through the global network they've established. Within hours, George Mason's drought-resistant crop varieties will be growing in research stations, agricultural training centers, and small farms across the developing world. Reynolds maintains his pragmatic focus on their immediate security. Americrop will detect the distribution almost immediately. We should expect escalation, potentially including direct intervention at this location once they realize what's happened. Michael considers their position, weighing options with tactical clarity. We've accomplished the primary objective. George's work is now irrevocably in the public domain beyond any corporation's ability to control or suppress. Now we need to secure the restoration series and the complete documentation of George's methodology. As they prepare to transport the most sensitive materials to secure locations, Reynolds receives another encrypted alert. His expression darkens. Americrop's security teams are mobilizing, multiple vehicles approaching from the main road. Their profile suggests private military contractors, not standard corporate security. Michael makes an immediate tactical decision. Ashley, Jason, go with Eleanor through the eastern exit route. Take the comprehensive documentation and restoration series samples to the secondary secure location. Reynolds and I will handle the Americrop teams. Ashley protests with her mother's determination. Dad, we're not leaving you here. Michael's response is gentle but firm. You're not leaving. You're completing the mission. George entrusted this legacy to our family. You and Jason need to ensure the restoration series reaches the right hands just as he intended. Reynolds supports Michael's decision with professional assessment. Your father's right. The documentation and restoration series are the priority assets now. Eleanor knows the evacuation protocol. We'll create a diversion to cover your extraction. As Eleanor leads the children toward the eastern boundary where an extraction team waits, Michael and Reynolds prepare to confront the approaching Americrop forces. They position themselves at strategic points around the farm's main approach, ready to delay any attempt to interfere with the children's escape. The Americrop convoy arrives with paramilitary precision, 4 tactical vehicles deploying armed security personnel in a standard perimeter establishment pattern. James Whitfield emerges from the lead vehicle, accompanied by an older man whose bearing suggests military background, but whose civilian attire indicates corporate authority. Michael recognizes the calculated intimidation tactics and responds with the calm assurance of someone who has already achieved his strategic objective. This is private property, Mr. Whitfield. Your presence constitutes trespassing. Whitfield's corporate veneer has vanished, replaced by undisguised hostility. You've violated multiple court orders and national security directives, Turner. We're here to secure all materials related to classified agricultural research developed on this property. The older man steps forward presenting identification. General Victor Harmon, retired. Special Security Consultant to Americrop Corporation. Mr. Turner, we have authorization from the Defense Department to contain this situation pending execution of a national security classification order. Reynolds emerges from his concealed position, his own military bearing, a match for the retired generals. That order hasn't been signed yet, General. And your authorization doesn't supersede constitutional protections against unreasonable search and seizure. Until you have a properly executed federal warrant, you're trespassing on private property. Harmon studies Reynolds with professional assessment. Thomas Reynolds, I should have known you'd be involved in this, still fighting the same battles from your EPA days. Reynolds' smile carries decades of institutional memory, and you're still doing corporate dirty work disguised as national security victor. Some things never change. The professional antagonism between the two men creates a moment of diversion that Michael recognizes and exploits, drawing attention fully to himself and away from the eastern boundary where Eleanor and his children are making their escape. The plant varieties you're seeking have already been distributed to agricultural centers in 27 countries. The drought-resistant strains are being planted as we speak. There's nothing to secure or contain anymore. Whitfield's composure cracks corporate calculation, giving way to genuine alarm. You have no idea what you've done, Turner. Those plants incorporate classified technology. Their unrestricted release constitutes a national security breach. Michael responds with the moral clarity that has guided him throughout this confrontation. They're plants, Whitfield, living organisms created to feed people and heal damaged environments. They were developed by one man working independently decades before your company even existed. There's no classified technology, just corporate greed trying to control what should belong to humanity. As the confrontation continues, Michael receives the confirmation signal. Eleanor and his children have reached the extraction point safely, the documentation and restoration series samples secure. The primary mission is complete. General Harmon, recognizing the tactical reality, attempts a final negotiating position. The basic varieties may be beyond containment, Turner, but the advanced restoration series is another matter. Those plants have specific military applications that legitimately fall under national security protection. Surrender those samples and documentation, and this situation can be resolved without further escalation. Michael allows himself a small smile of satisfaction. The restoration series is already beyond your reach as well, General. As we speak, independent research teams are documenting their capabilities under international scientific protocols. By this time tomorrow, the complete methodology will be published in scientific journals worldwide. Harmon's expression reveals grudging professional respect for the completeness of their operation. You've been planning this for some time. Reynolds answers with the satisfaction of a decades-long mission finally fulfilled. George Mason planned this 40 years ago, General. We're just implementing his vision. As the strategic reality becomes clear, Americrop's aggressive posture gradually shifts. The corporate security forces maintain their perimeter, but the immediate threat of violent intervention recedes. Whitfield withdraws to his vehicle for a series of urgent phone calls, while General Harmon engages Reynolds in a professional assessment of the situation. Michael maintains his position monitoring the farm perimeter while awaiting confirmation that the final phase of Operation Seedfall has been successfully executed. That confirmation comes 2 hours later, a simple encrypted message on Reynolds' secure device. Restoration Series documentation complete. International scientific publication initiated. All samples secure in multiple repositories under diplomatic protection. Operation Seedfall complete. The message includes a personal note from Ashley and Jason. "We did it, Dad. Great-grandpa's plants are going to help people now, just like he wanted." As this confirmation arrives, the tactical situation at the farm undergoes a sudden shift. New vehicles approach. Not Americrop security this time, but official government transport. Federal agents from the Department of Agriculture and Justice Department emerge presenting documentation to both Michael and the Americrop representatives. The lead federal agent addresses the assembled group with bureaucratic precision. By executive order, all actions regarding the Mason agricultural varieties are hereby placed under federal oversight, pending resolution of competing claims. Americrop security personnel are ordered to withdraw from private property immediately. Mr. Turner, you retain possession rights to this property, but any distribution of plant materials is suspended until ownership determination is complete. It's a classic government compromise, acknowledging the legitimate property rights while establishing federal control over the disputed technology. But it comes too late. The worldwide distribution is already complete, the scientific documentation published beyond any single government's ability to suppress. As Americrop's forces reluctantly withdraw, Reynolds receives another secure communication, this one from his political contacts in Washington. The classification order has been suspended pending review. Too many questions about the timing and corporate connections. Congressional Oversight Committee requesting briefing on potential abuse of national security protocols for corporate benefit. The tide has turned. What Americrop had intended as a quiet corporate appropriation of valuable technology has become a public controversy involving allegations of corporate manipulation of national security mechanisms, exactly the scrutiny they had hoped to avoid. Michael watches the Americrop convoy depart, understanding that while this battle has been won, the larger conflict continues. Powerful interests don't surrender easily, and the legal challenges to George's legacy will continue for years. But the essential victory has been secured. The plants themselves are now growing beyond any corporation's ability to control, fulfilling their creator's vision of feeding the hungry and healing the earth. As the federal agents establish their monitoring presence at a respectful distance, Michael walks the boundaries of the farm that had once seemed a burden, but now represents one of the most significant agricultural sites in modern history. The evening sun casts long shadows across fields where Georgia's experimental plants continue their quiet revolution, growing and thriving as they have for decades. Reynolds joins him, the mission accomplished, but the vigilance continuing. Your children arrive safely at the secure location. They'll remain there until we're certain there's no further risk of corporate intervention. The scientific publication process is proceeding exactly as planned. By morning, George Mason's complete methodology will be available to researchers worldwide. Michael nods satisfaction, tempered by awareness of ongoing responsibilities. And the farm Reynolds surveys the property with strategic assessment. Federal oversight actually works in our favor at this point. It prevents Americrop from attempting any direct action while the legal process unfolds. And their political capital is rapidly eroding as the congressional investigation gains momentum. They walk in silence for a moment, the weight of recent events settling into perspective. Then Reynolds continues with unexpected revelation. "There's something you should know, Michael. Something I've withheld until the operation was complete." Michael studies the older man, sensing the personal nature of this disclosure. "I knew your wife, Laura. I met her in 1908 when she sought my help at the EPA. She had found some of her grandfather's papers and was trying to understand the significance of his work. I explained what I could about Operation Seed Bank and the suppression of George's research. Michael stops processing this unexpected connection. Laura never mentioned knowing anyone from the EPA. Reynolds nods, understanding the surprise. She was protecting you and herself. After our meeting, she was approached by Americrop representatives. Subtle intimidation, nothing explicitly threatening, but enough to make her understand the risks of pursuing her grandfather's work while corporate and government interests were still intent on controlling it. She made a strategic decision to preserve what documentation she had to maintain the farm where George's plants were still growing, but to wait for the right moment. She understood that timing would be critical. Michael absorbs this revelation, pieces of his wife's life reframing in this new context. When she died, was that related to this? Reynolds shakes his head firmly. No. Her illness was tragically natural, but in her final months she contacted me again. She knew she wouldn't live to complete what her grandfather had started. She asked me to watch over the farm, to be ready when you might discover the truth, to help you understand what was at stake. Michael feels the weight of this revelation. Not just George's legacy, but Laura's deliberate choice to protect that legacy until the right moment for revelation. She had been carrying this responsibility alone, shielding her family from the risks while preserving the possibility of eventual disclosure. She never told me any of this. Reynolds' expression softens with understanding. She was protecting you and the children. The fewer people who knew about George's work, the safer everyone remained. But she believed that someday the truth would emerge. She trusted you would make the right decisions when that time came. Michael looks out over the farm. Not just George's legacy now, but Laura's as well. The evening light bathes the fields in golden illumination. The experimental plants continuing their quiet growth as they have for decades, waiting for the moment when their revolutionary potential could finally be realized. In the distance, he can see the wooded boundary where the continuity garden preserves the complete spectrum of George's innovations. Beyond that, in research centers and small farms around the world, those same plants are now beginning to grow, fulfilling their creator's vision of feeding the hungry and healing the earth. The supposedly worthless farm has yielded a harvest beyond price, not measured in dollars, but in the potential to change countless lives for the better. Just as George Mason had intended, just as Laura had preserved, just as Michael and his children have now brought to fruition. The seeds of truth finally taking root. Federal oversight of the Mason farm continued for 3 years. Congressional investigations uncovered decades of corporate manipulation of regulatory agencies, a pattern of systemic failures that extended far beyond agriculture into energy, pharmaceuticals, and defense contracting. Hearings exposed how legitimate national security mechanisms had been twisted to serve private interests, sparking widespread reforms in government-corporate relationships. Americrop fought through every available legal channel to gain control of George Mason's innovations, but the worldwide distribution of his basic drought-resistant varieties had rendered their efforts largely symbolic. By the time the courts issued their final rulings, affirming the Mason-Turner Family Trust's ownership rights, George's plants were growing on 6 continents, helping farmers from Nebraska to Namibia withstand increasingly unpredictable weather patterns. The Turner family returned to the farm 9 months after Operation Seedfall, resuming the quiet work of restoration and preservation that George had begun decades earlier. The Continuity Garden became the centerpiece of an international research station where scientists from around the world studied sustainable agricultural systems under the Mason Center for Regenerative Farming, funded by licensing fees from the commercial applications of the Restoration series. On a crisp autumn morning, 5 years after the discovery of George's satchel, Michael stands at the edge of what was once considered a worthless property, watching a military honor guard raise the American flag over the newly dedicated Mason Agricultural Research Center. The governor of Virginia and the Secretary of Agriculture stand nearby, their presence acknowledging what the official record now confirms, that a single scientist's moral stand against weaponizing his discoveries led to his deliberate exclusion from history. Today, that wrong is finally being corrected. Dr. George Mason's name now appears in agricultural textbooks alongside Carver and Borlaug. His photograph hangs in the National Agricultural Library. His story is taught in ethics courses at military academies and business schools as a case study in moral courage and long-term thinking. But perhaps the most fitting tribute isn't here in Virginia at all. It's in the million-acre dead zone surrounding Chernobyl, where the first tentative plantings of Mason's restoration series are drawing radioactive isotopes from soil long considered permanently contaminated. It's in former war zones where chemical weapons residue is being neutralized by plants that heal rather than harm. It's in drought-stricken regions where farmers harvest crops that their grandparents would have considered miraculous. Not every battle was won. Some of Georgia's more advanced varieties remain under restricted development, deemed too sensitive for unrestricted release. The Pentagon still classifies certain aspects of the restoration series as matters of national security. And Americrop, though diminished, continues to fight for corporate control of global agriculture through new patents and political influence. But the essential victory remains intact. George Mason's vision of plants that feed the hungry and heal the earth has escaped the laboratory, the boardroom, and the classified file. His innovations now grow in millions of fields tended by farmers who may never know his name, but who benefit from his lifetime of patient, principled work. Ashley graduates next spring with a degree in botanical genetics, already recruited by 3 international research organizations. Jason's high school science project on soil microbiome restoration won national recognition from the Environmental Protection Agency. The children have embraced their great-grandfather's legacy not just as inheritors, but as active stewards. Thomas Reynolds retired from public service after seeing Operation Seedfall through to completion, but still serves as an advisor to the Mason Foundation. Eleanor Wright leads the scientific team documenting the long-term environmental impacts of Georgia's regenerative agricultural systems. Both understand that the work they've done represents not just scientific advancement, but the fulfillment of a moral obligation to place human welfare above institutional or corporate interests. The farm that was once dismissed as worthless now serves as both a working agricultural operation and a living museum of scientific courage. School groups tour the continuity garden, learning how one man's vision survived decades of suppression to emerge when the world needed it most. Military officers study the case as an example of the complex ethical challenges facing those who serve in institutions where secrecy and security sometimes conflict with broader human welfare. As evening approaches and the ceremonies conclude, Michael walks alone to the oak tree where George had hidden his final message to Laura. The tree stands taller now, its branches reaching toward a sky that seems more hopeful than it did 5 years ago. Not because all problems have been solved, they haven't. Not because all wrongs have been righted, they haven't been. But because one small act of preservation, one family's determination to honor their heritage, helped unlock solutions that generations of institutional thinking had overlooked or deliberately suppressed. The future remains uncertain. Climate challenges continue to mount. Corporate and political interests still clash with humanitarian needs. But in fields and forests around the world, George Mason's extraordinary plants continue their quiet work of healing and renewal. A legacy more enduring than any monument, more valuable than any fortune, more powerful than any attempt to control or suppress it. Seeds of truth, once planted, have a way of growing beyond anyone's ability to contain them.